Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. St. John Paul II, in his letter to artists, wrote, "Not all are called to be artists in the specific sense of the term, yet, as Genesis has it, all men and women are entrusted with the task of crafting their own life. In a certain sense, they are to make of it a work of art, a masterpiece." That idea certainly runs through the work of my next guest. He, too, embraces the notion that we are all caught up in the creative act of God, meant to craft our own masterpiece. ERWIN MCMANUS is a Christian leader on creativity and the interaction between faith and art. His latest book, The Artisan Soul, makes the assertion that we're all artists. He joined me recently here in studio to discuss. Take a look. ERWIN, you make the suggestion, indeed it's an assertion in this book, that all people are artists. Now, in the book you mention your wife, and I bet there are a number of people watching who say, wait a minute, I'm not an artist. I'm not artsy in the least. You would say what to them?
I would say, well, when people tell me I don't have an artistic bone in my body,
right.
I say, you may not have an artistic bone, but you have an artistic soul. Because when people think they're not artistic or creative, what they mean is I can't paint, or I'm not a dancer, or I can't play the violin.
Right.
And when I say that you're an artist, what I mean is that you have all the tools of being an artisan. You imagine, you dream, you see in the invisible, and then you translate that into reality. Every human being essentially creates. In the same way that bees create hives and ants create colonies, humans create futures. We imagine a world that doesn't exist, a life that we've never lived, a future that we've never known, and then we create it through courage, passion, and through discipline and skill.
There's a line in the book, and you write, "True creativity is born of risk and refined in failure." Explain that, and why do you think people are so afraid to create, to take those risks, to live the life that God's calling them to live?
I think some of it is that we've been programmed to imitate rather than to create. We're raised to color inside of the line rather than to begin to imagine outside of the lines. Some of the interesting research on children is that before we're 12 years old, most of us are really naturally divergent thinkers, about 95% of humans, and only about 5% are convergent thinkers. But by the time we pass the age of 12, only 5% of people tend to be divergent thinkers.
Explain the difference.
So the difference is that when you're 5 years old and they give you one question, you think of 1,000 different answers. When they ask you to solve one puzzle, you think 1,000 different ways to solve it. But by the time you get to around 12, 13, 14 years old, you're only looking for one answer to fill in the blank because that's the way you've been trained. That there's one thing you can do with the iron. There's one thing you can do with that rock. But if you're talking to a 5-year-old, they'll give you 50 things they can do with an iron.
Conformity. I mean, that's really what you're talking about. And you mentioned that this is discussed in the book, this notion of having to be like everybody else. Is that one of the things that sort of holds people back, keeps them from the personal, divine path that perhaps they're called to?
Well, remember, we wouldn't conform if we didn't get something out of it. It's not that we're all driven to conform. We're all driven to long to belong. We all want to be loved. We all want to be accepted. And if conforming is the only way we can belong, if conforming is the only way we can feel loved and accepted, then we choose to conform rather than choose to be rejected.
I love this idea, though, that your life can be your masterpiece. This is the canvas you're given.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the through line of the Artisan Soul.
Absolutely. Some of the core phrases for me is in the book is, you are both a work of art and an artist at work. And that all of us, if we can embrace this part of being human, that we're all works of art, that we're created by God, we're imagined to imagine, created to create, and that we were an idea in the mind of God before we ever had an idea in our own minds. But at the same time, we're also artists at work. The moment we begin to imagine, the moment we begin to dream, and begin to realize those dreams and imagination, then we begin our artistic journey.
There's a great line. You say, "We begin when God exhales and we inhale." That really is a nice description of prayer.
It is a beautiful description of prayer. And one of the lines in the book is, we breathe, therefore we create. And if you think of that first moment when in the scriptures, when it says that God breathed into humanity,
right,
hit the breath of God, and that's when we inhaled. God exhaled, we inhaled, and life came into us. And I love that intimate moment because in a beautiful way, mankind began with a kiss. Humanity began with a kiss from God. when he breathed his creative force into us, and we inhaled his creative force, and we've been creating ever since.
You talk about the narratives that we tell ourselves, which can be destructive.
Absolutely.
If they aren't true, if they aren't guided to something bigger and outside of ourselves, something divinely inspired.
You know, for me, I look back at my life and I realized that I was a classic underachiever. You know, I was a straight D student, 1st through 12th grade. I didn't go to college right away. I was just working construction and working as a carpenter and just finding any kind of odd job I could. And really, my life looked like it was going nowhere because it was going nowhere. By the time I was 12 years old, I was in a psychiatric chair. I spent a lot of time in a hospital. I was a really broken human being. And I look back and I realized that there was a narrative inside of my soul that told me I was nothing, that I would never amount to anything, that I was broken, that I was a defect, and that I would always be alone in the world, that I would never amount to anything. And those voices were so powerful in my soul that even when people tried to encourage me or tell me that there was value in me, that story didn't stick. And so in the second chapter of the book, I talk about the narrative that guides, that all of us, in a sense, have this inner voice. But that inner voice is really the culmination of all the voices we've ever allowed into our souls. And some of those voices have wounded us, and some of those voices have healed us. And for me, the transformative moment was when the voice of God became the principal voice inside of my soul that said I had value, that I mattered, that I was created in the image and likeness of God, that my life had intention and meaning. And that voice began to silence all those other voices that were telling me that my life would never amount to anything at all.
And the book you mentioned, we've been telling ourselves these flawed narratives since Adam and Eve.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trying to justify the fallenness, the brokenness, all of this. Tell me something that happened to you in 2012. You reference it here. You say there was a betrayal, something went wrong, you lost everything you'd sort of worked toward. You were floating high. You felt you had the wealth and the cushion, that your life was going to continue like this, and then boom, 2012 happens. You don't say what it is in the book. What was it?
Well, Erwin, thank you so much for bringing up one of the most painful moments of my life.
I want to bring up the happiest narratives I can possibly dig up. It's part of my vocation.
Right. Well, I've always worked in multiple fields, and for years I had a fashion company, and I had a film company, and I owned a tech company, and life was going really, really well. And you know, I had formed a partnership. I had to sit down with my wife.
What was the lesson? What was the takeaway when it was
Well, I
over?
sat down with Kim and I said, honey, I need to tell you, I just lost everything. And her response to me without blinking an eye was, I thought I was your everything.
Oh.
And when she said that, I didn't know what to do when she said that. I was,
wow.
I was just overwhelmed. I said, who says that? You write that in a film and you think, no one says that. There is no human being who says that. And of course I didn't know how to be as noble as she just was. So I said, well, I lost my other everything.
the other half of everything.
Yeah.
Well,
and you know, and one by one I told my kids, told my friends, and my kids were beautiful, really. You know, my son, he said, you're ERWIN MCMANUS, you'll be fine. And Dad, there is nothing you cannot overcome. And my daughter said, Dad, you know, you have so much responsibility in your life that I think God wants to do something new, and you would have never walked away from that, and because you're so responsible. I think God was just wiping the slate clean and letting you start a new part of your journey. And
is that what he was doing, do you think?
It was not easy. I mean, I spent a year going back and finishing every project they did not finish. I took out massive loans just to finish everything so that no one was left unpaid, paying employees that were not paid and finishing projects that were not finished. And I remember after a year saying to our community, I wanted God to meet me through my faith. In other words, provide some kind of miraculous intervention. I said, but he didn't. He met me in my faithfulness. He just gave me the strength to see everything through and finish every project and finish this journey with integrity.
And turn you in a new direction.
Yeah, so I would say, yes, God met me, not in that miraculous faith kind of thing we'd love to see, but in a moment of faithfulness to teach me that I have the strength to overcome this kind of difficulty.
Well, I love the line from St. Teresa of Avila, who she's going to build a new foundation. She feels called by God to do it. She gets in the carriage and goes across. There's a flood. She falls out. She's there in the wet, the water's up to her knees, and she says, is this how you treat your friends? And he says, yes, it is. She said, no wonder you have so few of them. And that's probably how you felt in that moment.
But you know, it was one of the most beautiful times of my life as well. And anyone who's ever created any kind of artistic work knows that pain and brokenness becomes the best material for creating something beautiful. Not if you drown in your despair,
Right.
not if you wallow in your own bitterness, but if you find hope in the despair, and if you find life in the midst of that, and forgiveness in the bitterness, then you have the material to create a beautiful life.
You say in the book that really one of the keys to create something that's eternal, that's of real lasting value, is to make yourself something eternal and of lasting value, and that's through a spiritual formation. But many people forget that. They cut God out of the creative act. This is my thing. This is what I do. This is my business. This is my work, whatever it is, or my book, or my play, or my whatever. God is kind of an afterthought.
Yeah, you know, I think, Raymond, coming at this from really multiple places, I am so convinced that the church needs a creative revolution. For me, this is my creative manifesto. I think for a couple of reasons. There are more people out there who would say, I'm not creative, because they were told all their life they were not. And they need to embrace their identity of who they are. They are creative beings. But then there are this other group that says, well, you know, God's really not for creativity, so I'm going to create without him because I can't get permission, so I'm going to do it almost in rebellion. See, I think the reason many people go to create without involving their faith is because they actually believe that God is not for the creative act. I was in New Zealand speaking to filmmakers and television producers and directors and a lecture on creativity. And after about 3 hours, this really renowned director said, you speak so much about creativity, but the Bible leaves no room for creativity.
Limitation.
He said,
it's all limitations.
How do you
thou shalt
reconcile
not, they
that?
said.
That's right. And I realize, see, what the church desperately needs is a new narrative. We need to see the scriptures in a fresh way. We need to take the Bible back from those who turned it into a manuscript of conformity and reclaim it as a manifesto of creativity. I told him, I said, how in the world could you see the Bible as not having any room for creativity? The opening act in the Bible is God creating everything.
Yeah, from nothing.
From nothing. The Bible begins as a creative act, and it is a continuous creative act where God invites us into the creative act.
And you even suggest in the book, it's true, that the boundaries, these limitations are actually good for creativity. Explain that, because that would seem to be, I mean, this was always the rap. Flannery O'Connor, the great novelist, used to always get the, how can you be a Catholic and be a writer? And she said, in fact, those walls make me freer, make me see the world. I'm freer with my talent, and I have to be better than the competition because of the expectations placed upon me.
That's right. The whole mythology that creativity requires no boundaries is just that. It's an illusion and a mythology. The greatest novels that have ever been written, whether it's War and Peace or Catcher in the Rye, were written with the same number of letters.
And that's by itself, I can attest, limiting.
That's right. And yet, what they could do with the same number of letters is a proof of the wonder of the creative act. There are only 3 primary colors. Every artist has always been limited to those. Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, they were all limited to 12 notes. See, creativity isn't about having no boundaries. Creativity is what we are able to create within those boundaries. That's right.
I want to end on this. You make special mention of the first miracle that Jesus performs here. Turning the water to wine. Why that miracle? And you know, I guess I never thought about it. I never stopped it. You think, oh, this is the first, and then there are many others. But it is an interesting thing to consider. Why that was the first one. It was so mundane. It was so small, if you will. You see a deeper lesson there. What is it?
So when I opened up the Bible and the first miracle is turning water into wine, I'm going, this is sort of underwhelming. If I'm Jesus, I'm starting with walking on the water, calling Lazarus out of the dead.
Casting out demons. You want something spectacular.
If you're going to end with the resurrection, you should really start with something spectacular. And he's at a wedding he doesn't want to be at. It's not his own wedding. His mother forces him to be involved. And in fact, he says, I'm not going to do this. And she just ignores him and says, do what he says.
Fill up the water.
It's like that. Oh, Jesus has a relationship with his mother like I had with mine, and most of us do.
But you listen to her.
That's right. You still do what she says. And I thought this is so interesting because when Jesus has them filled barrels with water, then he says, now take them to the master of ceremony. And when he tastes the wine, Jesus isn't there. And I love that because there's so many different issues here. One is when he tastes the wine, it's the best wine he's ever tasted. And he says, where'd you get this wine? people use the best wine first while everyone can still taste the wine, and then bring out the really bad wine when everyone is already drunk, right? But you've brought the best wine at the end. I thought, why did Jesus make the best wine in the world? What a waste of a miracle. And then it struck me that all art is an extension of the essence of the artisan. There's no way God could have ever done anything except for the best. That wine is an expression of the essence of Jesus, so it has to be the best wine in the world. Because really all we create is the externalization of what is inside of us. If we're filled with love and hope, optimism, joy, we create that kind of world. If we're filled with hatred and racism and anger and unforgiveness and bitterness, we create that kind of world. But I also love this. Jesus didn't sign the jar, made by God. And he trusted the quality of what he created to draw and drive people to himself. And this is a part of what I'm asking in the Artisan Soul. Shouldn't our lives be like good wine? Instead of having the right Jesus all over our T-shirts and putting it on the back of cars and letting people know that this belongs to God, shouldn't our lives be so rich with life and joy and adventure and curiosity and beauty?
That the works speak for themselves, and the excellence and the beauty and the goodness, truth, and light that people are seeking.
Absolutely. We should be the best teachers in the world, and the best writers in the world, and the best engineers and architects, and the best humans. So when people taste of our lives, they go, where did this come from? That's the Artisan Soul.
The Artisan Soul, Crafting Your Life into a Work of Art by ERWIN MCMANUS, is available at bookstores everywhere. It is a fascinating read, particularly those of you in the arts or anyone with a creative streak.